Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is Wendy at TAASA, and today we're going to talk about working across the lanes. I just want to tell you that TAASA is a statewide advocacy organization that works to address and eliminate sexual violence through public policy, training, prevention work, and supports to programs that serve survivors of sexual violence, whoever they may be, because we respect the fundamental rights and dignities of all Texans. Okay, what we're doing now is we're working across the lane. And so I'm going to do just a very quick overview so that we can all understand how important it is to stay in our lanes and to respect the information and the expertise of other folks who work with us but have their own particular lanes that they need to stay in. All right. So first up, I think we know that advocacy is a process that enhances the safety of the sexual assault survivors. It ensures responsiveness of the community systems to the needs of the survivors, especially the justice system. And why do you think I would say especially the justice system? Think about what the justice system, how it operates, what it does, and what information sexual assault advocates can help with for a survivor of sexual assault within that system. And hopefully all of us working together hold perpetrators accountable so that we have a system in place that keeps all of our communities safe. Basic components of advocacy is understanding the issues, recognizing your allies, identifying opponents and resistance, and developing a plan. Why is it important to recognize your allies? And why is it important to identify opponents and resistance? And then develop a plan. Because these are things that are extremely important in the work that we do, that everyone does who works with sexual assault survivors, which helps us then for the clarity of purpose, independence, confidentiality, all these things. We keep a person-centered approach. Okay. And moving forward, I am going to quote Detective John Lumley, who told me at one time when we were having a little discussion about how we should operate, and I told him, John, damn it, excuse me, but I do cuss. John, damn it, we're all on the same page. And he looked at me and he said very calmly, no, Wendy, we are not. We are all chapters in the same novel. And that made me take pause. And after that, I thought about how we all work in our own lanes. Okay. What we have basically is community-based and system-based organizations. The community-based organizations are the NGOs. They are the nonprofits. We get around in a circle and we hold hands and we sing Kumbaya from time to time, and we love on each other, and we all think that we should play with each other. In a systems-based organization, which is most of everyone else we work with, this includes law enforcement at every level, CJD at every level. They have at the top the CEO, and they have at the bottom the workers, and they're divided into departments that have team leads and supervisors and middle management and senior management and executives, and everybody goes up and down a chain of command. And it's really, really important that we understand that that is how communication is given. It is not necessarily from bottom up. It mostly is about top down. We're in with the community organizations, our nonprofits. I have always had the ability at whatever time, and it's changed over time, but what used to be called a flat organization, where you could just walk into somebody's office and talk to them and see them without ever making an appointment. This is important when we talk about how we coordinate, collaborate, form coalitions, form task force with community-based and systems-based organizations, and the amount of time it takes us to get from one to the other. Okay, so here it goes. Community-based, I have it listed here, but we also have with community-based differing confidentialities. And that is so important, because when you work for government, when you work for anybody inside of the government, you do not qualify for confidentiality and privilege per se. When I was working inside of a law enforcement agency, I was horrified that they were yelling details of a case that they were working on down the halls at each other. They couldn't understand why I was so upset, and I couldn't understand why they didn't understand what was going on with me. So I'm going to leave this screen. I'm going to put it up for a minute, but we have to figure out how we can break down these barriers and work collaboratively within healthcare systems, because they are also systems. They are systems-based, and the social service system. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kim Farbo, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike Sweeney, and I am going to start with something that I want you all to chat in. At the same time, I want you all to understand that they're here to answer questions and talk from their experiences in the field, which is really, really important. I began to realize how important it was about, I want to say 20 odd years ago, when I was working within the police department, and a young woman, it was a date rape, and things were a little bit different 20 years ago. And I asked the detective saw the victim leaving my office, and he came up to me and he said, quote, "I really believe that this assault happened, and yet we couldn't find any evidence on, physical evidence to move it forward. How is she doing?" And I looked at him and I said, "Dave, I can't really talk about it. I think we're moving along. Right now, she's grieving the loss of her favorite coral-colored cashmere sweater." And he looked at me and he said, "What color is coral, Wendy?" And I explained it, and it happened that they did find a coral cashmere sweater at the scene, and that reopened the investigation, and it sent the perpetrator eventually to jail. This is why it is so important for us to understand boundaries of what we can and cannot say, and to work with MOUs. So with that said, my part, I'm stepping back. Mike and Kim, it is all yours. Folks, chat in what you need to chat in and what you need to say, because I'm going to let Mike and Kim introduce themselves, and we'll go from there.
Hey, my name is Kim Farbo. I work for TAASA. I've been here almost 3 years. I am retired from the Austin Police Department, where I spent the last almost 13 years of my career working adult sexual assault, sex crimes only. So let's, if we can, focus on adult-only sexual assaults, because that's all I can speak to. And my partner here in crime is...
Good morning. Partners in crime, no pun intended.
Exactly.
But my name is Mike Sweeney. I'm with TAASA. I started in TAASA in 2013, left in 2014, went to Ghana, Africa for 3 years, and then I returned to TAASA in 2017. Prior to that, I was a law enforcement officer for almost 30 years. About 18 of that in vice and narcotics, and relocated to another state, became the chief of detectives there. I went to the FBI Academy. While I was in Ghana, I was the executive director for investigations and law enforcement development for human trafficking on Lake Volta in Ghana. My job title here at TAASA is human trafficking specialist, although through my 30 years in law enforcement and as a a supervisor. I've done literally hundreds of sexual assault investigations with my detectives as well. So anything that might come up, I think between the two of us, we might be able to answer it. If Kim and I get to bickering and hitting on each other, or just send in a note and we'll stop and get back on point.
Okay, since I see no questions yet, I have something that I didn't know that I needed to understand, and I still do need to understand, and that is what questions you ask, how you ask them, because from an advocate's point of view, sometimes the questions that are asked tend to feel like they are re-victimizing a sexual assault victim. That's my question. Explain that process, please, of why the questions are set up the way they're set up and how advocates can potentially help a survivor with those questions. You know, what questions are coming? Because if I was sitting there and my advocate, my victim felt like they were being re-victimized, I'd hustle that victim right out of the room. But if I understand why the questions are being asked and what the purpose for them are, I then have an opportunity to work A, with law enforcement, and B, with the victim, so that we get something, everybody gets what they need out of it.
Correct. So I started in 1986, and we had 2 crisis team members on the street. And I have to say, with Austin PD, we actually had a great relationship with our crisis people. So I kind of got brought in with working with crisis at a very young age, and it continued all through my career with Austin. However, there are times when it seems like the entire process is kind of cloak and daggerish, where it's dark and we want to leave the lights off, and we sometimes tend to forget that the victim truly does not have an idea of what is coming next. And what they see on television in 1 hour minus 12 commercials is they see the crime occur, they see patrol officers show up, and they might see a brief exposure to a detective or investigator, and then immediately go straight to courtroom, and potentially the person's found guilty in that 60 minutes. In the general public, I think, really does feel like that's how it works, and it doesn't. So I think we need to take a little bit more time to explain to our victims what exactly the process is going to entail, and which gives them kind of an idea of what to expect next. We can't possibly explain everything to our victims, and that's why we have to depend on our advocates to help with everything from getting our victims to and from the interviews, to helping the victims pick up their kids if they will, to rehousing, getting new housing because they were sexually assaulted in their residence. I mean, it truly takes a village. I say this at all my trainings, but it truly takes a village to make these cases work. And so I think we just have to explain more, help our victims understand really what is going to be needed next from them. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And we've come a long way since I started in 1984. And I would think at that time, the advocates and the police didn't probably have real good relationships because we didn't understand each other. But here we are 30 plus years later, and Kim and I wouldn't have a job, but for going around the country and training officers how to be more trauma focused, more victim centered. And I think the bigger departments, and even back then, the bigger departments, the progressive departments were more attuned to that, and they were integrating advocacy into their departments as well. The problem therein lies in the rural areas. They don't get that type of training, that type of specialized training. And that's what Kim and I do. We travel the state And we teach the neurobiology of trauma and how that affects our survivors and what to expect in an interview from a survivor. If they're laughing doesn't mean that they're happy or that the assault didn't occur, right? So we're educating officers, especially those in the more rural areas that don't get the extent of training that the big departments get.
Because these officers, you know, they don't know what they don't know, literally. If they haven't been trained to this information, how can we expect them to do anything different than what they're taught at their level? Now, you're going to have to come up with some good questions, people, because eventually Mike and I are going to get tired of telling stories, but we can continue to tell stories. What is this a question?
That's
Wendy?
my question.
Okay, so we have one more question. What questions will first responders ask victims? So there's a new thought process on first responders and sexual assault victims. The new process is basically to get just enough information to determine if a crime occurred, the details about the crime, and then get that victim off to have a scene exam done. Now, I will say I'm kind of torn between that, and I'm not sure Mike's thought on this, but if you get too few details, you may potentially lose a witness, lose a suspect, or definitely lose evidence at the crime scene, depending on, you know, there's so many things that depend on each and every crime. So you do want to get enough information to really cover all your bases and get that victim off for a SANE exam and or medical treatment if that's the case. If it's delayed report, I like to think that we are spending a little bit more time getting the information, getting more thorough information from that victim, so that just in case there is evidence at a location, that we can get that stuff before they actually have an interview scheduled with an investigator or detective. Because again, even if they just walk up to the PD and make that report, it still is going to be probably 48 to 72 hours before a detective is assigned the case, and then assuming it's not a weekend or assuming that that detective isn't off, contact is made and interview is scheduled.
I agree. And it's so important, that first contact by the patrol officer, because that sets the tone for the whole investigation. If that survivor at that point does not believe that the officer believes them, we start losing the case from the get-go. So again, part of what Kim and I do is we train these first responders how to be empathetic, the questions to ask. We have to get enough information, as Kim said, to establish that there was a crime committed. We'd like to get as much detail about the suspect as we could to apprehend him so that he doesn't go on harming others, and any potential witnesses. First and priority is the welfare of the victim, right? So the first thing they should be asking is, are you okay? Do you need medical attention? And have that on its way. But beyond that, we need to cover just those basic things a patrol officer does in an empathetic fashion to keep that investigation alive. The investigators receive a lot more training, are much better trauma focused, but that first responding officer will set the tone for the entire investigation. And I'm sure as advocates, you've had your clients come to you and say, man, that guy, you know, he didn't believe me, or he was rude, or he was ugly, and it's very hard to overcome once that happens. So that's a priority. And the International Association of Chiefs of Police, there are several organizations that have set standards in concert with advocates to lay an outline and procedures of how the investigation from the in-call, the dispatcher takes the call, how the dispatchers handle the sexual assault over the phone, how patrol officers respond, how investigators respond, and then how they prepare the cases to go to court. So they've worked together in conjunction with advocates, the Chiefs of Police Association, to put this best practice policy forward. And it's a national standard. So you should be getting that way.
Okay, here's a question from, it's their CAC rate crisis has been invited to come in and train officers at the training academy. Is there a curriculum someone uses if invited to present at local law enforcement academy? If there isn't one, what do you recommend to make it worthwhile for the trainees?
So my question to you is, you're going to train on, I take it, advocate information versus law enforcement information. How long of a training that they want you to do? I do not have information on advocate training, but I bet if you email one of us, we can find that out for you. Wendy?
You can email me, I'll be happy to send
Yeah,
that out.
email Wendy or any of the three of us, and I'm sure our emails are going to be on here somewhere, and we can help you with that.
And the other thing about that is I think when I was training at law enforcement academies many years ago, the thing that was most helpful, and even when I was doing training at universities, at universities, that one of the things that was very insightful for academy, for folks who were going into criminal justice work to have, was the neurobiology of trauma piece. And the other one was how to document accurately, how to put in information without editorializing. But that's something that each person needs, each community needs to sit down and figure out how to do that. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know about how y'all are trained in a police academy, but when I worked in smaller towns, sitting down with the ADA or the CA's office and finding what they charge on, what would be, what is it called, the points that they would convict on, those convictable stuff, what do they do? What's the standard that has to be met? And so therefore being able to follow in one, the first responder writes everything the same way, then it goes up the chain that keeps it going, but not saying this is what happens. Like I met a SANE nurse at one point who said that she had a case thrown out of court because she said the evidence meant that the victim had been strangled, and the defense attorney came up and had it thrown out because he asked her where she got her medical degree. She was not a doctor to make that kind of informed decision. So those are things that I think would make it worthwhile for the trainees to understand and to have, and also to further their careers along. I don't know about anyone else.
Okay, so here's another question. How can advocates and law enforcement work together for safety planning? So advocates, I'm going to assume that you probably work with your sexual assault detectives or investigators on a regular basis. Really, honestly, you need to develop a relationship with them. When you go in and you talk to them, ask them for some help on safety planning. We don't do a lot of safety planning. We leave that to our advocates. But if nothing else, get some tips from the law enforcement, your local agency, on, just basic safety tips, to the point where when you walk out to your car, don't be on your cell phone, have your keys in your hands. I mean, that's basic stuff, but when you've been a victim of intimate partner violence or domestic violence or stalking, that is super important. Have a notebook that you write down in that notebook every time there's an incident with the suspect.
Yeah, I agree. Have a go bag, a bag packed with 3 days of provision, clothes, some snack food, water, ready to go at any given time. But any law enforcement can give you those tips and tips to secure your house and safety tips go into your vehicle. Those things are all important, especially when you're a victim of a crime and you become hyper vigilant then of your safety. The survivor just having those in hand or having some advice given to them gives them great peace of mind as well.
Yeah, and in this day and age, there are so many tracking devices and available, and a lot of times the suspects will put those on the victim's phone, and the victim is just can't understand why he knows where she is, that she's at HEB or she's at Sonic or she's out with friends constantly. I mean, those are things that you can go to the officer or your detective and have hopefully somebody from their high-tech unit look on that phone to see if there's a tracking device or whatnot. When we pulled tracking devices off of victims' cars, and I retired almost 10 years ago, and they were doing that.
Unfortunately, it's the ones that we know, we trust, and maybe even love that hurt us the most, right? Stranger sexual assault, I won't say it's rare, but it's less than 20% of the sexual assaults that occur. So the other 80% are someone we know, love, and possibly trusted, possibly loved, which already had access to our cars, to our phones, to our computers, right? So it's not a hard stretch for them to be putting these tracking devices into our phones and our computers. And those are some things that the victim needs to be aware of, even as far as dump the phone and just buy a track phone and start over.
Right. So the next question is, what is the best way to convince police that they need trauma-informed training? Oh, that's a good question. We love to train that all the time.
I got an idea for
okay,
you.
there you go.
So I agree, and that's very hard. And the majority of the guys get it and want that type of training. Even Kim and I in our travels around the state, there are some that just don't care. And those are the ones we need to deal with. I would say the best thing that you could do would be to sponsor law enforcement training in your community, in your area. And I'll kind of toot our own whistle for our own training. Kim and I will come out anywhere in the state. If you can put together 20 people, and Kim and I, we do advocates and law enforcement, but if you could organize a training and sell it to your local law enforcement, and I think that would be a good way to get them starting to recognize the importance of it. You know, they bill us as an expert, and we come in and we can give an hour and a half to 2 hours, and you can fill the rest of the day or the rest of the 4 hours with other issues that you think they need to know about. But I think that would be a good start.
I am the grand manipulator of all, so, and that's a horrible thing for a social worker to say. However, I also believe how to convince them. If they're interested in moving up in rank, if they're interested in moving up in, closing cases or whatever, learning more, closing cases, showing that you can take command or leadership. I mean, I point out all those things. I don't know how often that works, but these are just pointers. These are things that, here's the deal, guys, go online, look it up, find out what's going on with the new methods and see if you can incorporate some of that here. Do you think it will help you in your career? That's the kind of stuff that I used to do, not in a snotty way, but saying, wow, there are all these new researchers coming out, like Rebecca Campbell or David Lesick, right? And even, just take it might be worth taking a look at what they're saying. It might work for y'all.
Another thing, I mean, you can actually use Austin as a point of reference. I mean, we've had recent lawsuits out of some kind of botched sexual assault investigations. I will tell you, in the time that I've been with TAASA, I have learned an immense amount of information And I think back to some of the cases that I worked and I realized I screwed up and it kills me. I mean, I just literally think about some victims and the way that they responded and the things that they said. And I remember back in the day thinking, what victim laughs? You know, what victim won't return phone calls? If this was that serious, why isn't she calling me back? And now I get it. Now I understand. So there are some nights I actually spend thinking about these cases and wishing that I had known the information that I know now. So it's a great way to get somebody's attention when there's a local department near them being sued about cases that they're not working correctly. So let's move on to this next case, next question. I'm an advocate for a rural community. It has been very difficult at times to work with law enforcement. That's a surprise. Do you have any tips or suggestions on how to build working relationships with our local law enforcement? So my question to you is, when's the last time you went in and just talked to an officer or talked to a detective, an investigator, and kind of just humanize who you are and what you do and try and get the same back from that person? We really all have to get along to work these cases. And even when the cases are worked best, when the advocate believes, when the detective believes, the victim many times has difficulty getting from point A to point Z in these cases. It takes such a long time. We have to develop these relationships so that we trust each other when these cases come up. I mean, every victim is going to be different. Every case is going to be different. But the advocate and the detective work in the case. If they can get a relationship going, then they do trust that the information that's being given to them is correct and true. And I think the advocate understands that the police officer is trying to do the right thing. The elements of the crime may not be there, and vice versa. Mike?
Yeah, I agree. Spend time with them in a non-case environment. Maybe go to lunch together, and learn who they are, and at the same time have them to learn who you are. We get a lot better results that way in any relationship, right? If I'm coming into your office and I'm demanding this or that, and that's the only time I see you, we're not going to have that type of relationship. But if we have a relationship outside of a case, that helps the cases that come in the future, right? And the biggest thing is you can help them understand how great of a help you can be, because even if he's a rural detective, he's not just handling sexual assault cases. He's handling anything from any felony type of case up to murder, beyond sexual assault, burglaries, auto thefts. He's handling them all. So he's got maybe 50, 60 cases crossing his desk every month. And he can't really spend the time with the survivor that he needs to spend. But you can help him do that. You just need to see that you need to make him see that you can do that, right? By offering, hey, I can get her to court, or hey, you want her to come in for an interview, she's got childcare needs, but I can take care of that. I can help you out, right? Whatever that may be, frame it in the light that you're helping him and you're lessening his load, because in fact you are. There's no way that he can do that and do it properly, any of us, right? Unless we work together. That's why it's so important. And as Kim said, it takes a village, because to do it properly, and Kim talked about the length of these cases, this case may not go to court for 3 years, right? That's a long time to maintain a relationship and to let that survivor know that I care, I'm invested in her case, when I have 50 to 60 more cases running across my desk every month. But through my advocate, if I have a close relationship with my advocate, I can remain tied in, I can remain invested through my advocate, and and let the survivor know that, hey, I'm still there. I'm still there. We're still working this case. Hang in there with me. We're going to get it done. And together we can do anything that you need to get done, right? But he can't do it by himself. And that's where you need to sell what you do, because in all honesty, he just can't do it by himself.
I'm going to come at this from an advocate's viewpoint. It's very different for advocates who work in the field, who have time to devote, like you had just said. So I'm going to make some suggestions that I used and I got from other advocates in the field, because when I started back in a long time ago, there was no trust. Nobody wanted to have an advocate. I mean, the first office I had was literally a what is it, a laundry room kind of stuff. That's where my chair was. That's where my desk, quote unquote, was. I heard detectives talking with each other. Use your skills. They were talking about certain things that were difficult in their lives, and I overheard it. Why? Because they were not used to having confining walls of, they talk about everything. And one of the detectives, his child had just been diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. I went out of my way to find out what the good places in town were, the good doctors, the lung specialists, and gave it to him as, support groups for the family to use. And he was totally touched and couldn't believe that. Why would I do that for him when I'm, quote, the enemy? So understanding who could oppose you and why, and understanding who your allies are, or who you need to make relationships with, is very important. One of my cohorts who worked in a very rural part of Texas, at least twice a year would go around to every single sheriff's department or outreach or city police in the small towns and the counties that they served, and they brought them baskets of cookies or baked goods or something with a card in each one that said, "Thank you so much. We appreciate all that you do." They don't understand what we do, and believe me, we don't understand all that they do. If you're lucky enough to be in a larger city and you have more support, but I just even think when I stopped working at APD, Vice, human trafficking was still in Vice. They were not just investigating human trafficking; it was everything. So
We didn't even call it human trafficking back then, though. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm. So there was a question here about the inability to understand, and I know I'm leaping ahead a few others, but I want to say that when we start thinking that our way of talking is the only way, I call that cultural imperialism. We've got to break through that. We have to understand each other's language. It is like going into a foreign. If I were going to go visit Sweden, I would have to learn a few words of Swedish in order to get by. This is the same thing. When we first formed the Human Trafficking Task Force, we had a lot of law enforcement coming. Why? Because in law enforcement language, task force means something totally different than a coalition, and we meant coalition in law enforcement term. So learn the languages that they need. Where are the stumbling blocks? Go back over and talk about it again with patience and kindness, because the person who is going to suffer if we don't get along is the victim.
Correct, definitely. So let's move on. I thought a victim had a right to a forensic exam. When does law enforcement get to authorize or decline an exam? You are correct. A victim does have a legal right to have a sane exam. Wendy, do you have details on that?
No, but I have heard, unfortunately, of victims walking in and law enforcement saying she calls every day, or, and this is back in the day. I mean, I haven't done direct services in well over 15 years. So the details on that is usually somebody's misinformed. I remember going into a community and the law enforcement agents say, "We never respond to rapes in this part of town, because every time we do, it is a false report. They're just doing it for revenge. And I know that that is not what the URC says. It's usually around 3 to 4% a year of false claims. But I do know that everybody does have a right, and it is not law enforcement driven. It is victim driven. So if you have a problem with that in your community, the only suggestion that I can make then is to call Chris Kaiser here at TAASA, who is our attorney, or Liz Boyce, who does or LASA, so that we can get on with that and move that forward, because as far as I know, it's not legal.
So I'm going to try and get some more information on that really quickly. So let's get back to it. I promise I will try and come back to that question. Here's somebody sent in a comment about our advocates had to ride along so many hours with the PD here just so we can get the feel of how they go out on calls firsthand. I love that. Mm-hmm. I think that is a great opportunity, one, to develop a relationship, and two, to kind of understand more what kind of calls these are and how they're dealt with, and really just like this person says, firsthand stuff. I would love to see law enforcement maybe spend some time sitting with advocates when they deal with victims. I can't remember, wish I could remember where, but I was at an agency and they actually did that with their detectives, so that there is that back and forth. Then the detective or officer knows what the advocate is doing, and vice versa. Advocate knows what the detective or officer has to get and do to make these cases happen, because they are intricate and very complicated. I mean, sexual assault is a very complicated crime to investigate. And if all the stars and planets don't align, we can't get these victims to the finish point, which is prosecuting the bad guy and holding them accountable. Mike, anything on that?
No, I agree. I think that what we're looking for is elements of the crime. Those have to be met in order for us to submit it to the district attorney for a prosecution. However, and sometimes that just doesn't work out. It is what it is. But that doesn't mean that it's over for the survivor either. There are still civil remedies that can be sought. They can be sued in civil court. Just because you don't get a conviction in a sexual assault case doesn't mean that the victim or the survivor or victim still can't go forward and seek some kind of justice outside of the criminal justice system.
Okay, there's another question about where can we provide where we can get our info for trainings and fees, etc. Mike, you want to talk about that real quick?
I'm sorry, I'm sliding over. Look at the question again.
How do they get information about our trainings and fees and stuff like that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So, TAASA, we're grant driven. Everything we do is paid for by grant. So we don't charge for our trainings. Our trainings are absolutely free. Again, the only thing, it's kind of a in-house policy, is we'd like to have at least 20 people to justify our travel. Just in the last year, I've been from north to south, east to west, and all around the middle. I can't even tell you the number of trainings that I've done, but they're absolutely free. Best access, you can go on the TAASA website, and there's a training request form on there that you can fill out. That goes to the training director, Liz Boyce, who's also our staff attorney. And she kind of divvies them out depending on our specialties and who best fits that training. Or if you have a trainer that you want to request, you could certainly do that too. The other way to do that is you could reach out to Wendy, Kim, myself, and just tell us the type of training that you're looking for. Our pillars that TAASA stands for, right, is we do legal, we do prevention, and we do training. So, that being said, we do training in all of those pillars. We do training on legal, we do training on sexual assault, human trafficking, prevention, all of those issues. We have one of the auditors that used to be with the state that helps go through rape crisis centers audits and books to help them with that too. We have a myriad of
We do advocate
services,
training.
and we do advocate training.
Okay, so let's go back to the victim had a right to a forensic exam. Why does law enforcement get to authorize or decline an exam? And here from her office is our legal expert, Liz Boyce.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If the victim has been sexually assaulted, the Code of Criminal Procedure gives him or her a window of 96 hours in which they have an absolute right to get a sexual assault exam done. You know, they do need to decide if this is going to be a report situation to law enforcement or a non-report situation. They can decide that they just want the exam done, and then, you know, the hospital or whatever medical facility that they go to perform the exam holds that and sends it to DPS. But in terms of a report, law enforcement is supposed to come and pick up that exam. Now, colloquially, I've heard of some counties where there's problems with that. That's kind of a case by case. They're not, I hate to say that they're not following the law because I don't know each individual situation, but in many cases, I think they're misunderstanding the law and could use a little bit of technical assistance on that. So if you have a situation like that, I would recommend calling us, and I could go over facts with you and kind of help you guide you through that process of talking to law enforcement, directing them to that specific provision in the Code of Criminal Procedure that provides them that absolute right to go and get the exam done. Now, there is an exception in the law that's written, it's a very narrow exception, and it's written specifically to address situations where the survivor, the person who is coming forward saying that they've been sexually assaulted, has a history of false reports. So it can't just be, you know, that they don't trust the person. They have an actual history of falsely reporting in the past, and there's no, you know, corroborating evidence that the actual assault occurred in this case. So that's the very, very narrow exception that is written in the statutes that I think a lot of times law enforcement agencies kind of latch in onto to say, well, there's no corroborating evidence. But what they're kind of missing and skipping over is the piece that there also has to be this history of false report as well with that specific individual. So anyway, long story short, yes, you are right. There is, in fact, that statute, and I can go into detail with you offline if you have specific examples you want to discuss.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
How's that for service, y'all? Just so happens we're all in the office today. Okay, any suggestions on effective communication when law enforcement has difficulty understanding victim needs and the inability to understand what the advocate is telling them? Mike? He's just sitting here looking pretty.
I'm pondering the question. We're almost speaking as if the law enforcement are aliens themselves and speak different languages, but in fact they're human, right? So, and Wendy had mentioned using your skills, and we have skills too. Police have skills in communication, right? So if we're speaking to somebody and they're not understanding what I'm saying, then I need to rephrase, use different wording, different phrasing, so that maybe to help them understand that. I don't know if I'm hitting on your question or not. Yelling and screaming won't work. Demanding won't work. My mom used to say you catch more flies with honey, right, than you do vinegar. So that works. And I would try that. Just try rephrasing it. They don't understand it because, again, like Kim said, they don't know what they don't know. And what it is, it's the basic root of it is a lack of training, right? So if that appears, and it seems to be a repeated pattern within a specific department, it may be something that you need to reach out to us. Because again, I think if you keep hitting your head against a wall, it's obviously it's not working, right? So you can reach out to us, we can reach out to them, offer them free training, donuts, whatever.
TCOL credits.
TCOL credits, they all need those. And we get our foot in the door and they hear it from an outside source, not coming from you. Right? Anybody that travels more than 50 miles, carries a briefcase, is an expert, right? You live in that county, you live in that city, you're banging heads with them all the time, let us help you. Because if they hear the same thing, even from a different person, they may receive it better. And we talked about it. Cops have their own language. They have their own brother sisterhood. That's why Kim and I are so very successful in what we do. When we go in and talk to them, it's not an advocacy group, right? It's not someone reaching out to them. We're brother sister cops, and they're more apt to listen to us than they are to an advocate, or especially an advocate that they're butting heads with. Even though we're going to tell them the same things you are, we do it in a manner, I think, that they more readily receive it, because both of us are old too. We've been there, done that, and have held rank on them too. So they tend to give us a little more attention than they do anybody just off the street. But we're going to tell them the same things that you are.
Yeah. And the only thing I can add to that is if you have a disagreement with a law enforcement advocate or even the attorney, please do not have it in front of the victim, ever. Walk out of the room, make an appointment to see them, thank them for their time, thank everybody for their time. We're in this together. We have different ways of getting there. We're chapters in the same novel, but we don't have, we can't force a story forward that isn't there.
And when Mike was talking about his mom and the different things that she said, my mom said a lot of things too, but most of them I can't repeat without getting in trouble. Okay, we don't have any more questions. Does anybody have another burning question for us here?
We've got about 4 minutes left, so please, you got a burning question, now's the time to ask it.
It is true. Cops speak a different language than advocates, but without the two working together, we just can't make this happen. Okay, another question. Does it matter how long ago to report a sexual assault? I'm assuming they're talking about a delayed report. So when we train, we tell everyone in our trainings that delayed report is kind of like the orange is the new black. Delayed reporting is normal. I mean, and we'll express every reason in the world why delayed report is normal.
Statute of limitations for report.
Or is this like a statute of limitations for sexual assault? If Crystal, if you can answer that.
Okay. All righty then. Any other questions? Here comes one.
Hold on. I don't think we answered the question. Is it statute of limitations or is it just a delayed report? I'm sorry, I was a little bit lost on that. So a delayed report is a delayed report. That's all it is.
Which is normal.
It's super normal. Now, there might not be evidence that is had, but pretext communications is an amazing way to investigate a sexual assault that occurred 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or even a year ago. I've heard stories of years have passed and the victim has had a conversation with the suspect and the suspect has pretty much apologized for what they did to the victim. So delay report really shouldn't matter a whole lot. It will play a part. It potentially will play a part, but pretext communications are a great way to get around that. I think we have time for one more question. What precautions should we take to protect the criminal investigation when providing legal services to our clients? I think that's going to be a Wendy question.
That to me, that's a legal question, and there needs to be a coordination for that, for protection between, especially the attorneys working on it together. But I'm assuming you said the legal question was from 10 years ago, it happened to the person as a child. That's a mandated report, period. That is, there's nothing else. You need to report it. Now, if the perp has passed, the need to report may be a little bit lessened, but from 10 years ago and it happened as a child, there's a 20-year statute of limitation. I think that was the old law. I think the new one that has gone into effect expands it by, I don't know, another 10 years or so. But and this is not uncommon, in my day, we used to call them AMACs, adults molested as children. And it is not uncommon for people to have flashbacks and remember something that happened to them as sexual abuse as a child. It is a mandated report, regardless of how long ago it was. It needs to be mandated. What I used to do with clients when this came up is I would tell them we have to call CPS. We have to make a report. I will sit here. I would go through the whole reporting context with them, what questions were going to be asked. And I would call first and I would say, this is Wendy Hilsenrod. I'm with such and such an agency. I'm a counselor here. And there's just been a disclosure. And then I turn it over so that they know that the person is working through it, that this is mandated. And it may be that the perp has been dead for several years. It doesn't matter. It is still a mandated report. Because if it was someone who is still alive, they need to go to jail.
Right. Okay, Chris, it looks like your question has been answered. I suggest that person go ahead and make that report. If nothing else, the detective or investigating agency may have 5 prior reports on this person, and so that's great information for the local agencies to have on the perpetrator. Hopefully that answers your questions. I think that is it, y'all.
Yeah.
I hope everybody got some information that is helpful for them in their day-to-day quest for us to find common grounds and put the bad guys in jail, which is where they deserve to be.
Thank you all so much for being here today. If you have more questions, please do not hesitate to send us an email or to call us. This is what we do. If somebody asks me a question I don't know, I run down the hall and get the person who knows it, just like Kim ran out and lassoed in Liz. So please do not hesitate. Housekeeping, in about an hour, you will get a follow-up email from TAASA delivered to the email address under which you registered. In that is an evaluation and a link to your certificate of attendance. So please turn in the evaluation, get your certificate. We thank you so much for your attendance today, and thank you.